What's a work-related accident that still haunts you to this day? While building Levi Stadium, a trucker was unloading rebar when the entire pile fell on him, impaling him multiple times and also crushing him. I never met the man, but his cat and elderly dog ended up at a local shelter. We planned to adopt the dog and ended up taking home the cat too because we didn't want to split them. Nina, the dog, passed away in her sleep in 2017, about 2 years after we brought her home. Seal, the cat, is around 7 years old now and doing just fine. I've always wondered if they ever thought of him. Engineer decided to open a parcel with a Stanley knife. Not sure if he slipped or what angle he was cutting at, but bam. Stanley knife in the eye. Never saw him again, but H&S quickly introduced a policy that safety goggles needed to be worn when opening boxes. Used to be a wedding caterer. While the bride and groom were going to cut the cake, it started to fall off the table as they were both trying to catch this ridiculously huge thing. The bride slipped, fell into a pyramid of wine glasses on a fold-out table behind her. The table collapsed and a wine glass stem pierced her neck. She survived, but she was not gonna be able to take that gown back to the rental place. I've never seen so much blood in my life. I was a cashier in a grocery store. One of my fellow cashiers was a senior, just killing time in retirement. One day, she had a dizzy spell, collapsed, and cracked her head open on the floor. Paramedics were called, and as they were loading her into the ambulance, she was crying out that she could still finish her shift. Trench collapse. Guy was pinned mid-chest, not good but not immediately fatal. Guy's coworkers freak out and use the backhoe to dig him out. Ended up catching him with the teeth on the bucket. Essentially cut him in half. The guy on the backhoe was his brother. Dude would have probably been alright had they rescued him the right way. Work in a dealership, and once a tech was using a tool that broke free, bashing him in the face, knocking out multiple teeth, splitting his lip and breaking his nose. It was a bloody mess. Young kid, with balls of steel apparently. While waiting for an ambulance, he was sitting there talking and smiled to show the damage. That smile was horrifying. He recovered and got a ton of dental work and still works there. Worked at Sonic when I was 15. I was on break and sat on the patio. I was looking at the road as this super nice car pulled into the drive-thru. As the car turned, a motorcyclist flew right into the side of him. He flew about 10 feet in the air before landing right on his leg. He slid about 8 feet before hitting the curb. His leg snapped into 2 pieces and his leg was basically degloved. I sat in shock before people started screaming to call the police. I ran inside and told my bosses. 3 of them ran out while the other workers started shutting down the store for the ambulances and police. I was the only one who saw what happened. His face was skinned. Leg was degloved. His fingers went in all directions. But it wasn't the sight that scared me. It was the wheezing noise that he made as he slowly started gaining consciousness. He was mouthing the words, "Help me." But his lips were gone. He could only make noise. I didn't work that day. And cried the whole time he was being put in the ambulance. The worst part was, the car who hit him drove off without staying a second. The owner of the car was eventually found, but nobody was charged. A few months later, the victim of the hit and run came to Sonic. He lost his leg and was still in the process of recovery. The guy came to thank us and let us know how he was doing. Glad to see he survived, but still traumatizing nonetheless. I used to fly small airplanes in Northwest Alaska. In the 2 years I worked there, I knew 3 pilots that died in crashes. Don't miss how those days felt. I dunno if you can call this an accident, but I was working with this guy and out of nowhere he says, "I'm sick of working here. Check this out," and jammed his foot into the gears on the machine. Completely mangled his foot. Saw him 20 years later and his foot was still fucked. He was looking for a couple weeks of workers' comp. Got a lifetime disability instead. It was pretty horrific. Deleted. Worked for Edie's Ice Cream. My truck was loaded wrong, so at a stop had to shimmy between pallets to get to the back pallet. Was unloading the top pallet and the pallet below collapsed. The top pallet slid onto me. But since I was between two waist-high pallets, about 1,200 pounds of ice cream bent me at the waist the wrong way. Sort of like bending over normally. Backwards. Ended up with 2 broken vertebrae. Nerve damage and was not fun. Eventually got a 6-disc fusion and was able to walk again. But now I have arthritis in my back and it really hurts most of the time. I also have numb areas in my right thigh and my whole lower back. Would not recommend. A coworker, who was fresh out of trade school, was using a table saw to cut thick sheets of plastic into strips. It was cold, so he put on some leather work gloves. A glove got caught and pulled his hand into the saw, nearly severing his right index and middle fingers. He came to me and said, I think I cut my hand. It literally looked like a package of pork ribs, all mangled bone and tissue. They were able to save the fingers. But they're non-functional and don't bend. I think it was the day before Thanksgiving 2012. There was a news story about a guy trying to reach something off of a platform at a local paper mill. He fell into a nearly boiling hot tank of caustic solution with spinning blades in it. There was absolutely nothing left. I have worked over those exact tanks numerous times. It's an old facility. But if you don't follow their safety policies right down to the T, they will throw you out in a heartbeat. That's just a terrible way to go on one of the worst days that it could happen if the year. I think about it often.